Hey everyone. So this training is on extinction. Extinction is one of the commonly used consequences that we use to decrease a challenging behavior. One of the common misconceptions of extinction is that it means ignoring your child. That is not the case. Yes, in the context of if your child is engaging in an attention-seeking behavior, that's the function, then we may consider ignoring that specific behavior to some extent, but not necessarily ignoring your child and only utilizing that for an attention-seeking function. I very frequently have heard people in other disciplines or parents or new professionals that are new to the field not fully understanding what extinction is. And I often hear them say, oh, I ignored my child today, so I'm implementing ABA. And I think that goes back to one of those things that I think it's just the perception, and that's how some people have learned that that's what it is. So I guess just my point is that I'm here to kind of explain a little deeper what extinction truly is, and how you can utilize it. So the true definition of extinction is withholding access to the maintaining reinforcer or punisher with the intent to decrease a behavior. So withholding a reinforcer that's already not there is extinction. So an example of that, going back to the attention-seeking function, your antecedent and your consequence look exactly the same. So we've talked a lot about the ABCs, right? Up to this point, antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. So the antecedent would be that your child doesn't have attention from you. The behavior is that your child kicks and screams. And then the consequence is that they still don't have any attention from you. So you're not removing anything, you're not providing anything, you're not changing your behavior at all. So essentially, like I said, the antecedent and the consequence are exactly the same. So in a typical scenario that we may have seen this behavior increase would be that your child doesn't have attention from you, your child kicks and screams, and then you turn to them and say, hey, what do you need? So that may have inadvertently reinforced that behavior by providing attention for the kicking and screaming. So in that scenario, we would likely do some type of extinction procedure, which is what I just stated. So that would be that you just don't change your behavior at all when your child kicks and screams. And then typically I would do a competing contingency, and that would be to teach an appropriate communication response. So in the other training, we called it a replacement behavior. So here we would teach them to say, Mama, can you help me? Or, whatever is appropriate for your child's language level. And that is an appropriate way to get your attention. And now I'm going to turn to say, hey, what do you need? So now we're providing attention for the appropriate response as opposed to the kicking and screaming. So in a scenario where we're doing an extinction procedure, our extinction procedure is where we're not providing attention for the inappropriate behavior because they're trying to gain access to our attention. However, the important piece too is kind of going back to the relevance of the function. For an escape function, we're not going to withhold attention because that's not the appropriate function and that's not what's maintaining the behavior. So in a scenario where your child kicks and screams every time you ask them to tie your shoes, basically what that extinction contingency would look like is that you ask them to tie their shoes. That's the antecedent. The behavior is that they kick and scream, and then the consequence is that you continue to have them tie their shoes. So in that scenario, you can see that you're not ignoring, you're not withholding attention, you are following through with your demand because that's what's maintaining the behavior. So an extinction procedure for an escape function, so in that scenario, your child is trying to escape the task that was presented. They're in hopes that when they kick and scream, you do it for them, or they no longer have to tie their shoes. So that's the outcome they're hoping for, but in following through, we are extinguishing, that's a term we utilize when we're using a verb to describe it. We're extinguishing the screaming response by following through with a demand that we originally presented. So you can see based on the two different types of functions of behavior, extinction looks very different for those two. If we were to, in the shoe tying example, if we were to just not change our behavior and ignore that the child was kicking and screaming, then we're reinforcing because now they no longer have to tie their shoes and now they're going to continue to kick and scream because it's getting them out of the task that we presented. So again, going back to the importance of the function and also the misconception that extinction doesn't always mean ignoring the child. And I do want to just point out too that notice in the example with the attention that we're not necessarily completely ignoring the child. We're ignoring that the behavior is happening. So we're not saying like, hey, stop yelling, stop screaming. That's not how you get what you want. We are simply not acknowledging that it's happening because we don't want that to give them the attention that they're seeking. So again, we're not just completely turning our backs and ignoring them, which, sometimes we do that because that helps. Like I know personally, my 4-year-old does not want to be talked to, touched, anything when she's engaging in a temper tantrum, which is the case for some kids. So that's something we kind of learn as we go. But also, like I said, we really find value in teaching the expectation and the skill that we want to see. So it's really tough in an extinction procedure because for me personally, an extinction procedure alone requires a lot of willpower, and it requires, and I personally see increased frustration from kids, and we typically would not use an extinction procedure as a standalone. Kind of going back to teaching that replacement behavior. Because if you're if you're cooking dinner and you're trying to not attend to your child who's kicking and screaming, it could go on for a really long time, which in a second I'll talk about an extinction burst. But, the issue being is if you're not consistent, then the expectations are going to be blurred again. So you want to make sure that if your sole procedure that you're implementing is extinction, that you can wholeheartedly commit to the extinction procedure. Like if you're going to just continue to pretend like you're cooking and not attend, you want to make sure that you do that for the full duration of, whatever's happening. That's one of the challenges, the consistency piece, but also, your kid may not know what the expectations are. Again, that's something that you would know best. And two, like as we get to know your child, we kind of get to learn these things, like what typical triggers are. Do they want to be talked to? If they do, then we maybe teach them an appropriate way to ask for us to talk to them, rather than, kicking and screaming. But a lot of times we just need to tell them the rules and follow through with those rules, or teach them an appropriate communication response to get what it is they're looking for. Because a lot of times they just don't have the communication skills to do that. And how are they supposed to magically come up with this expectation out of thin air if nobody's told them about it. So I'm a big proponent for, also teaching a skill in conjunction with this extinction procedure that you're implementing as well. Like I said, I think just for, to set the child up for success, to make sure that they know what the expectations are, and also to set you up for success, because I'm going to tell you right now, really tough to just straight ignore a behavior. To me, it's almost impossible. And again, it's like a willpower thing. So can you hold out longer than your child? And my child happens to be very strong-willed, so no, I can't. So that's, where I kind of just redefine the rules and expectations and the criteria for, what it takes for them to get what they want from me, and kind of just set the foundation up that way to help make sure both of you are successful. So with talking about that, I just wanted to touch on what an extinction burst is. So you may have heard this term, and it's very common, especially with an attention-seeking function. So what happens is, if you were previously attending to the child every time they kicked and screamed when they wanted your attention, that's the expectation that they have. So, going back to our contingency, your child doesn't have attention, your child kicks and screams, and I turn and say, "What do you need?" That's what they think is going to happen. So now all of a sudden, if you're not doing that, if you're just, carrying on with your routine that you're doing and not attending to them, you're going to see an increase, because now they're going to go bigger, better, and stronger to get your attention in the inappropriate way, until eventually either A, you cave, or B, they give up. So that's kind of looking at, we always talk about it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's what we mean. Because the expectations are different. So your child's adapting to the new expectations. And this is, like I said, an extinction procedure, a true extinction procedure is really tough to implement. So if you know that you're going to cave, then I wouldn't recommend doing extinction as a standalone procedure. Because what's going to happen is, I always tell families about the extinction burst that is going to happen. So you should see it get worse really quickly and then really significantly decrease and get completely better, with maybe spikes here and there along the way. But as long as you're consistent, should be small spikes. But with an extinction burst, so, when your kid goes bigger, harder, stronger, can you still continue to ignore? Because if you can't, and you say, "Hey, what do you need?" Now what happens is you attended to the bigger, better, stronger behavior, and now the child has learned that that's now the expectation to get your attention. So almost you've inadvertently made it worse, because now the child is going to go for the more challenging, difficult behavior first, because that's what got access to your attention more quickly. So we want to make sure that, you're prepared for that first. And, if you're prepared for that and you're, willing to go all in, then by all means, it's effective, it's quick. But again, it's a matter of consistency. And if you feel like you can't be consistent, then I would suggest not doing it. And like I said before, I know personally, with my daughter's attention-seeking behaviors, I cannot fully ignore it. So for me, I know that procedure is not something that I would ever put in a behavior plan for myself to implement, specifically for my daughter, because as all of our kids know, we have our things that push our buttons, and she has those things that are specific to me. So I think it's kind of knowing what's going to work for you, and based on your parenting style, what you feel like is feasible to implement. So again, just being mindful that anytime you implement an extinction procedure, it's pretty likely that you're going to see this extinction burst. So making sure you're mentally and emotionally prepared for that as well, to see that part through if that's going to be a component of yours. So if you are using an extinction procedure, and you're not seeing it work, then it's probably because you either have the wrong function or you're not as consistent with it as you think you are, or other people in your immediate environment are consistent with it. So if, my kid's kicking and screaming and I'm not attending to it, but dad is, then the child has learned that, like, okay, when I do this, someone's going to attend to it. Then we also still continue to see a maintenance in the behavior. So again, that goes back to one of the downfalls is that if you're going to implement a standalone extinction procedure, you have to make sure everybody's on board with the same consequence, or else you're going to see either the behavior maintain or spikes in other environments that, the consequences are different. So in knowing about, I talked about what extinction is, how to use it, an extinction burst, and whether or not it's working. I just want to provide some natural examples of extinction. Like how many times do we, look at, we put our key in the ignition and it's not turning over, or we put the key in the door and it's not turning. So we jiggle, 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 and we keep going, and we do it harder and faster, and then we stop, because now we just know it's not working. That's an example of, the lock's not working, and that is extinguishing our behavior of turning the key. And then you saw the extinction burst because we're jiggling harder and harder and harder to get the result that we want, and then we didn't get it, so then we give up and move on. So that's a perfect example of what the cycle looks like. So you see, you have this behavior occurring and you're looking for that consequence that you typically get, which is that the key unlocks the door or the car or starts the car, and it's not doing that. So you go harder and stronger to try to get that result. And then when you still don't get it, you see a plateau of, okay, well, I'm not going to try it anymore. It's basically like I'm giving up type thing. So that's kind of the course of what an extinction burst looks like. And like I said before, that's kind of what extinction is in a nutshell. But before implementing anything like that, I would highly suggest looking at the functions of behaviors training, because that talks more about, making sure that you have the appropriate function, and also teaching some type of appropriate replacement behavior with it as well. All right. Thanks, guys.